We good? Are you guys just looking at me?
The
Joey, do
computer.
you have everything you need?
Yeah.
All right. Well,
I even got a
hello,
backup just in
everyone.
case. Oh,
Welcome to Joey Interrupting Me. Well, this is the first episode of Books, Beers, and Banter, where the three of us are going to talk about books, drink beer, and have a little bit of off tangent banter in between. But so the first book that we're reading is Sapiens by Yuval Noah Harari, and the subtitle is A Brief History of Humankind. And I'm here. My name's Shane. I'm here with Lucas and Joe. You guys want to say hi?
hi, fans.
Hey guys.
I think it goes to say, though, I don't know if you're going to go into it or not, like the reason why we're reading these books in particular and, how we set it up.
You picked the category. So I guess to set you up, we basically decided that for this, these conversations or our like book club here, we're going to pick a category of books and cover like 3 books on a specific category before moving on to a new one. Each of us kind of get to pick our own category, and we'll kind of cycle through just from one category to the next based on what we picked. But so this category is books that Joe picked. And so Joe, you want to just like explain why?
Yeah, honestly, it was tough coming up with categories, I'm not gonna lie. But the way I went about it was just thinking of, at least in myself, I lack a lot of, worldly knowledge, I'd like to call it. So I figured an easy way to get into that could, branch out into other topics down the line, would be some of the more, books on like the formation of like the global economy, and, kind of like that. So the books we picked were Sapiens, a textbook called Power and Plenty, which we're not doing anymore because Shane vetoed it, but that is what it is. Then we got Gardens, Germs, and Steel, and then we got The Silk Road. So they all kind of have like a basic underlying thread of like global development. I think, so far in Sapiens, it's a lot more about, the evolution of, man, the Homo sapien. Whereas Guns, Germs, and Steel, from what I understand, is a little bit more about how, in particular, those 3, factors influence the development of a lot of different pockets of society throughout different times. And then the Silk Road was basically a trade route, I'm pretty sure, from back in the day in like the East that, caused a lot of formation because of that, global trade and, cultural development and whatnot. So we'll see how it goes from here. I'm excited to do it. Not be one of those people who only know about America, get a little bit of global knowledge under our belt and see where it leads to.
And I think it just goes to say that we're, this is basically what this is essentially just a book club where we're going to be reading these books. We're going to say like, hey, we're reading these sections in this order. And, if you're interested in, we're going to be talking about them. So if you want to just like listen, you can learn about the things that we're reading about, or you can read along with us and kind of have us to, send us an email, tweet, whatever it is to like bounce ideas off of. But we wanted to just kind of have like our own book club because we have, similar interests. And so who knows how this is going to develop because we don't have a real like structure to it. But I think we'll start putting some sort of a structure to things over time. But for now, we're just kind of getting into it and seeing how it goes. But
so these are weekly episodes, and we're not reading a book every week.
Oh no,
so we're breaking each book into 100-page sections. So every week we come in with a different 100 pages read. In this case, it's literally just the first part of Sapiens.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, and sometimes it'll be like this time it's 75 pages because Sapiens just happens to be broken up into 4 parts. So part 1 was 75 pages. The part 4 is like 150 pages, but we'll just, some weeks it'll be a little bit more, some weeks it'll be a little bit less. But we realized that we wanted to do something that's manageable and like possible for really anyone as well as for ourselves. If we have a busy week, like you can crank out 100 pages of reading. And then, basically, I guess to kick it off with this one, we're talking about Sapiens. This is part 1 that we read so far. So if you haven't read it and you want to, go read part 1 and then come back. But part 1 is the cognitive revolution. The other parts coming up are going to be the agricultural revolution is part 2. Part 3 is the unification of mankind. And part 4 is the scientific revolution. So it kind of goes through like very broad strokes of history. but this first part, I don't know, Joe, or Lucas, you have any ideas on what you thought, like where you want to start off with the first part here?
Honestly, I thought it was pretty fucking interesting.
Yeah,
I'm
me
not gonna
too.
lie, and I found myself referencing it this past weekend in conversation. I forgot how it came up, but we were talking about like the milk industry, and I was talking about
Mhm.
one of those things about like the sucklings of the cows and shit. And that's another thing whoever's listening is gonna figure out is that we're not really linear with this shit. We're gonna hop around all over the place. It's not gonna be in like
Oh yeah.
chronological order of it. But what I literally just looked at was the first note that I wrote down in my notebook was a quote from the book, and it said, "The most important thing to know about prehistoric humans is that they were insignificant animals with no more impact on the environment than gorillas, fireflies, or jellyfish." Then I wrote
Which
a
isn't
dash, ouch, which hurt. I was like, damn, fuck you. But then, yeah, I was like, wow, that sucks. And then you read like the last section of the book, and he's like, yeah, prehistoric humans are like accounted for like 80% of fucking
all of the death.
extinctions.
Yeah.
Yeah, I'm like, what do you mean we're not significant at all? What are you talking about? And you know what I like about this dude who wrote it? And like, there's some points where he's like, I'm gonna butcher it until I paraphrase, but he was like, oh yeah, when he's talking about like, you know, I don't know if he said like tree huggers or like animal
He did. He
activists,
said
like in
tree
modern
huggers.
day
He said tree
extinction.
huggers.
Yeah, he's like,
Yeah.
dude, like people nowadays are nothing in comparison to like us
Yeah.
back then. Which
Wave
Yeah.
3 is nothing compared to wave 1 and 2.
Yeah, dude,
Yeah,
exactly.
people who glorify like the when he says like tree huggers, in my mind it came like the people who glorify like the Native American way of living, and I'm like, you know, they were also kind of like ruthless at the same time, and like, you know, killing. I think he mentions like killing off the older, like, you know, putting an axe in the back of the head of a grandma
Yeah.
because she was slowing down the
His
tribe
aunt.
or something.
Yeah, he
Like,
killed his aunts.
Totally
yeah,
spun it.
And
and
he
he like,
goes, "Now I'm
and he
weak. Now I'm
bragged
weak."
about it. Yeah, he's like, I don't do that anymore because I'm weak. I was like,
Yeah.
oh my god, this
Not
is
okay
not
in
someone.
this society.
Yeah.
Yeah,
No, I definitely, yeah, that was super interesting. Like, I feel like, you know, obviously, like the whole point was that there was this switch where we just like became smart, and we're able to like come together around myths, like common shared myths, like what's a corporation, a company,
storytelling.
etc. But
Yeah.
yeah, but and then all of a sudden we were able to like, he talks about crossing over into Australia and just killing everything and anything that came into our path.
the megafauna, like the
Yeah.
20 feet tall sloths and everything like
Yeah,
that.
right.
You know what's wild? I don't know if they had it in the book actually. When the fuck were dinosaurs?
That was
Like over
Wait,
Like hundreds of
Way-
millions of
yeah,
years
yeah, yeah.
ago.
million
Like
years ago,
we're
yeah.
talking like 100,000 years and prior.
We're talking
with
about like
us.
the slightest little blip on Earth history.
Yeah.
Earth, I think it starts off by saying like the universe formed 13 billion years ago. Earth formed 4 billion years ago. Humans came. Oh, it actually, dude, there's a timeline in the beginning of the book, I think.
Yeah.
Yeah, here you go. Yeah, and then humans evolved in Africa 2.5 million years ago. So, and then Homo sapiens evolved in 200,000 years ago. So in theory, Homo sapiens have only existed for about 200,000 years.
Yeah, which I love the part where he's like, we so humbly labeled ourselves as quote unquote wise man, is what like Homo sapiens means. It means the wise man.
Dude, it's also crazy that there's multiple different, types of humans, or like the Homo genius.
Yeah.
And when he was like, modern day, if there was, Homo sapiens, Homo erectus, Neanderthals, all that, like, would there be like segregation? Would there be like, different classes and whatnot? Which is like kind of wild to think. It's like, well, if they were like, if they didn't develop like intelligence, it really reminded me of Brave New World, Shane, when they had like the 4 different classes of people.
Oh yeah,
and like
yeah.
the workers were like the stupid, not they were dumb ones, Brave New World. I was like, that was totally what would happen. We would just like have enslaved those people instead of like different cultures. You know what I mean?
Well, the interesting thing is that he talks about that we have that though, like, but we're combined now. Like
with the Neanderthals.
Yeah, like what you're saying is like
a tiny little sliver.
Yeah, that was like
the idea was that to some degree there was some sort of cross breeding between Homo sapiens and Neanderthals at one point in history. So that I think that was more of a point of like there was peace between different types of humans and less of like
Could have been
They're less
forced.
advanced. Oh yeah, or forced.
Definitely didn't have to be fucking peaceful.
Yeah.
You know what's super weird about this though? As I'm reading it, I read it as like a fucking like it's like a hero's journey type arc. I'm like, all right, dude, like it's us against the fucking giant animals. We take them on. It's us against like the other people. We take them on. I'm like, they're going through it, and like, I don't know if I'm supposed to feel bad about like all the shit that the Homo sapiens are killing and destroying and changing, but I'm like, my boys, that's my ancestors
Yeah,
right
we
there,
did it.
you know, like. You know, whatever. If it's bad, it's bad. But you ain't got no Neanderthal person thinking about it because we wiped them out. So it is what it is. But I think what was interesting and kind of like the the catalyst of everything was like the language, which I think that was pretty commonly known. Like at least what separates us nowadays from like most primitive animals and everything is like language and opposable thumbs. That's like always like two things fucking people say, and like maybe like the abstract thought, but like he really hammered that out as to like why. And I think the myths part of it was something I really didn't think about, was that like that's such a unifying like concept or structure to it, is because it makes sense. It's like we could theoretically, I mean, it's like you have the United States, I mean, as ununified we are on certain fronts, like for the most part, besides like a very slim amount, like everybody's a nationalist. You have like the certain outliers and whatnot. Like granted, within it, it's like you have different religions, different political affiliations, blah 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 blah. But there's always like the underlying thread of that.
But
And
you
I think
also have
that
the
even in
paperwork, like
the what?
you have the signed paperwork that says you are an American.
Yeah, that's true.
That we all agree means something. Like for some reason, we're like,
Yeah.
this
Well,
all.
But also like Catholics, I don't like I'm not Catholic, but like Catholics don't have like a signed paperwork that says like you're Catholic.
Yeah.
You know what I mean? Or like Muslim or Hindu or whatever. And I think the most underlying core to them all is that like to some regards, like everybody on Earth realizes that like we're connected by being human. You know what I mean? Like I think that other animals and species, I don't know if they do or don't, but like I think that there is like a string that attaches everybody's. Like we all have, I don't want to say like basic human rights, and that's what makes us all like compatible and whatnot. But I think to some degree, realizing you're a human and realizing that you're living and that like you have that similarity with somebody else, like gives you just a very faint bond, but it's like definitely a bond, like nonetheless. Whereas like my dog, like I don't know how much of a bond it'll have with like a different dog. Even though they're both in our same situation, but they can't. Their limiting factors are maybe they do have the bond, and maybe they can't just like come to terms with that. Maybe they can't rationalize.
Well, I think that they probably know that they're a dog, and like they know another dog is a dog because they can mate together. It's like instinctual. Like
And
that's
they're
what one
also
thing he
both
talked
like,
about
oh,
is
let me
that.
smell your ass. Oh yeah, let me smell your ass. All right.
Yeah. Oh, we're dogs.
Yeah.
Like,
But it's like, why
we smell
do
our asses?
I mean, I guess it's just like a different thing, but like you don't see like humans like you ever see just like you walk Charlie, like does another dog just randomly start fucking yapping at him out the blue?
Oh, yeah.
You know what I mean? Like you don't, like, as humans, like for the most part, I'm like I remember the last time I seen somebody just start screaming at some random person like.
But we're
on
also
the
like
street,
we are civilized. If that's the point you're making, like it's not acceptable to do that. But if someone walks up on you and you're like, "Hey, get the fuck away from me," like,
yeah,
I think like that's not exactly like something that's
it's not apples and apples.
It's frowned upon a little bit to do that.
Yeah, dude. Talking about the dogs though, domestication. I think one of the wilder things from this section was like with the wheat. You know what I mean? When he's talking about like the domestication of wheat and how like at first we were super nomadic people traveling, whatever. And like the one possible theory he had was like, you get your wheat, thousands of seeds on it. It's beer's making me burpy, but and like the seeds gradually fall out, and some wheat grows, and then when you do like your little patterns or whatever, like you have wheat there, and then more comes and more comes and more comes, and eventually it's like you no longer have a need to migrate from there. You have like this it's better worth your time to cultivate the wheat than it is to keep traveling for food and whatnot. And like the one fucking line that like really I was like, wow, was where he said,
Wait, was this in part 1?
Dude, what the fuck? This does not sound familiar.
This is in part 2 for sure.
Oh, you're right.
Guys getting ahead on his reading, bringing it into the wrong conversation. Ixnay that thought.
My bad.
Save it for next week.
When you started talking about wheat, I thought you were just talking about how when people like initially turned into farmers, how their diets got so imbalanced because hunter and gatherers would just be able to trot around and catch a rabbit and then eat some berries and then eat some roots and then have a mushroom. But like people who grew rice would eat rice for breakfast, lunch, and dinner, and like pray that they could get something else like over like their trade routes.
Yeah. Did they say that in the book? I don't know where I am now.
How much did you read?
No, just the first part of the second section.
I just thought like the whole thing of the first part was, and like you kind of spoke
about the brain.
Like, it's not just like language, but it's like the ability to like I mean, it's literally cognitive thought. And it's the ability to understand like, you know, hey, there's a bear next to the river. Like that's the limitations of so many thoughts and languages. I mean, it's every other species, every other thing that lives, right? Whereas us, like we can understand what, like the whole Peugeot example of like understanding what a corporation is.
Oh,
like,
yeah.
Trying to describe that to your dog. How the fuck is Charlie ever gonna understand what a corporation is? But we just have like these things that we then trust in, that we can then build a stronger and more like, you know, in like just founded civilization on. That was the whole.
No, yeah, and there's like the, you know, like that part of our brain that developed over that time. Like I'm pretty sure, I don't know if reading it in this book or somewhere, but it's like the part of your brain that allows you to do that is like your neocortex. I'm pretty sure if I'm butchering this, but like it that is what really has expanded over time, and that is literally the part of our brain that lets us say like, is there going to be a lion up the road or is there not? Like, let me imagine and go run through the different circumstances, and if there is, what am I going to do? You know what I mean? Like that process, like a dog or, you know, and like another animal can't imagine something that's happening that's not already happening. You know, they can't think like, what if this happens? What will I do? Whereas for us, and like, what's interesting is it's also like one of the basis of like all of our mental distress of like imagining things that are going to happen that never actually happen, and like worrying about like worst case scenarios, like, oh, what if I get fired? You know what I mean? But like in reality, like you're not going to get fired, but like you're going to conjure up all of these different scenarios. And like in the modern world, it's obviously helpful, but like it's also like a hindrance.
I feel like it was more helpful. I mean, it's still helpful nowadays, obviously, but like back then when you had to worry about more like survival-esque, you know, situations, it's like being able to, you know, mentally, you know, like go down these different hypothetical paths was a lot more, you know, beneficial. Whereas like now when survival's not, you know, the main prerogative anymore, it's like, all right, what else? I feel like the brain's always got to worry. It's just like, okay, well, now I'm not worrying about hunger or getting murdered or like, you know, any like your basic fucking, you know, needs are met. It's like, let's find stuff to worry about at this point, because like you got to worry about something, you know.
There has to be some voice going on there.
Yeah, exactly. It's not perfect, so let's figure something out.
I also think that he's just like a very good storyteller, because when he's describing like hunters and gatherers, like you start to get this like really like peaceful picture in your head about like life back then, and how like there's communities, and like, hey, like we're not really sure because it's really hard to tell throughout history, but like there's either communes or there's, you know, like nuclear households, or like we're not really sure how it works, but like blah blah, everything's really happy. And he's like, just so you know, there's also this really negative side to it. I want you to think like this is all like fine and dandy. Like it's also very, very scary. There was a lot of shit that happened, and like he does a very good job of like portraying things in one light and then like cutting his thought off, because he knows where like the reader's head is. Like, wait a second, don't worry, we're getting to the shit stuff next. Like,
I definitely had to like scratch out some notes. I was like, dude, this dude's fucking like, he's talking about, I think it was literally that exact thing. I'm like, he talks about it was all fucking fine and dandy and shit, and like how like life was better back then. I'm like, talking about?
But then he shows us the tribe where the guy shoves you know, puts axes in the back of his auntie's heads, like, and they kill children, like.
But you have to, I feel like, like
they were like the ash
trying to like put yourself in like those shoes. It's just like,
no, of course, like you don't want to judge that.
Ethics were like the last thing to develop. You know what I mean? Like moral compasses, like those weren't like, that's way beyond survival.
Well, also, no, I think it's also like the moral compass, like to your point, is look, if we don't kill them and like, or exile them, we're all gonna die. Like that is like, it's kind of like the trolley problem. Like, do you kill the one person or the 5 people? You know what I mean?
Trolley problem.
Like you
it's like this
the one where you push the guy out,
you
push him off the bridge and he fucking saves the trolley or something.
It's
like
like
something. There's so many different renditions of that.
5 people.
Yeah.
No, sorry. your decision kills one person or your lack of decision kills 5.
Yeah.
I remember that,
Yeah.
like biomedical ethics, and it all boils down to like what, like belief, you like can't.
Are you a utilitarian?
What's the
Yeah.
term, by the way? Like when you have to choose who survives? It's like what the whole COVID fear was at first.
Ultimatum?
There's a word for it, I forget, but like
I
that
don't know.
hospitals would have to go through it and be like,
Oh, triage.
yeah, triage. Thank you.
Yeah.
But it's like understanding.
You know they do that and still do that. You know who
That's
who
what I'm
started
saying.
that? Fucking who was the chick from back in the day, the English one? Very famous woman. She was like the warrior chick.
What? Can you give me some more context?
No, I really don't have any more context.
Well,
the warrior,
the warrior chick, for the English warrior chick.
What the hell's her name?
Queen Elizabeth?
No.
Bro, I have no idea like where you're tying this to. This is gonna kill him too. We're gonna be stuck on this for 5 minutes now.
I know, right? I'm about to just start moving on and we can go back if you want. I see the stress taking over your face right now.
I actually thought the whole there was something that brought me peace in like that our brain isn't bigger than the brains of like certain period Homo sapiens, that like when they were truly skilled hunters and gatherers, like that's when the brain was the biggest, because the amount of like refined like actual skills that people had,
I think
were absurd.
I wrote down I was against that 100%. I said I think this is bullshit. I don't agree with that point at all.
You think historically that's wrong, or what do you?
I think historically we know we have way more knowledge in our heads than any hunter-gatherer had.
No, for sure. But he's saying physical brain size was.
Yeah. No. I know physical brain size. So like there were some requirements that it was different, but in terms of like he mentioned that, and I don't know where I like wrote it as a note because it kind of like set off this thing in my head, and I was like, there's no way they had more, like he said that they had more knowledge than we did now in their brain at an individual level.
More refined technical skills. And I think that was the whole brain size thing, is that the way that those skills and the way that their lives worked, that takes up like more, at least the way that I was understanding it. Is that
yeah, let me find the quote because I wrote a note here. I just want to like read what I wrote off.
I'd say like terabyte to terabyte, we probably store more fucking knowledge in our brains now because there's more data to be consumed.
Yeah.
Back then, they were thinking in very different ways of survival, and like also just like I just thought it was super cool, like that this guy can make a spear out of like a little flintstone in a minute.
No, yeah.
Whereas like you and I would literally struggle for that for days, hours, and like these guys, like these people, not, you know, men, women, whatever, they had, you know, 10s, 20s, 50 skills that they had that refined, that in theory take years and years and years to refine, but they had all of them down, like by the time that they were adults. And they just lived such like a, like they knew what they were doing well. And like here I sit like struggling with like, what do I want to do in my life? And like these people just like had their shit. They're like, I'm gonna get your head,
but it was also, I feel like back, it was like they didn't have an option to choose. It's like
of course
all the things that they were skilled in were based in necessity.
Well, I think also so what I wrote in the note was that and I just lost it again. God
buy
damn
the book,
it, I literally
dude. Just
had
buy
it
the book.
All right.
I'm gonna start texting him up the wazoo so it fucks up his phone.
Dude, no, I put my phone to the side and then I put it back up, and for some reason it like completely just went to a different section of the notes that I had. Where? All right. Well,
all right, we'll edit this section out, Shane. Good job.
I'm so frustrated.
Yeah, you and I, like, our facial expressions are going to change so drastically.
Oh, yeah. It's like...
Cut back, and you and I are like...
Yeah.
Mouth breathes down to his phone.
Okay, so basically what he said, what I highlighted was the human collective knows far more today than did the ancient bands. But at the individual level, ancient foragers were the most knowledgeable and skillful people in history. And I said, I find this hard to believe. Modern humans know math, history, at least one complete language. No shot these people knew more about the world at an individual level.
Yeah, but he's not saying the world.
No. But he's saying they're the most...
words that he used, knowledgeable.
He said we're the most knowledgeable and skillful people in history. They knew about, like, of course, they knew how to, like, live on the land. But, like, knowledgeable means like they have a lot of knowledge.
I think that in their world, I think it's talking about like comparing apples to apples. In their world, they were much more knowledgeable of their world than we are in our world of our world. Think about how much more there is to know right now and how little we know of all of that bigger picture.
Yeah,
Of the pie, they knew
absolutely.
that portion of that pie, and they were also incredibly skilled.
Yeah,
Of course, but their
because making a spear was
it depends on what
fucking
the
10% of all the
denominator is.
knowledge you have
It
to
depends.
know.
So
you
it
know?
depends on what the denominator is. Are you
Yes.
talking about all of the knowledge cumulatively at that time?
I think he's
versus
It could be of relevance.
But I'm saying
Yeah.
of everything we know about the world now that was still true back then, like math was still true back then, you know, like algebra and calculus was still true back then. Like
no, I think at that time though, on a person to person, on a societal level, like think about this, like today,
got offended.
what happened? Like you could know about, you know, quantum physics, you can know about programming, you can know about plumbing, you can know about architecture, you can know about like this, that, and the fucking other thing. You know what I mean? Back then, none of that fucking existed. It existed, but it wasn't actual.
It wasn't known. It wasn't knowledge back then.
Yeah, out of 100 million topics you can know today, there was, you know, 10, let's just say hypothetically, just an exaggerated number back then. You can know how to make a fire, you can know how to whittle a tool, you can know how to do pottery, you can know how to fucking paint your hand on a cave. You know what I mean?
Yeah.
But there wasn't, you know, obviously these things were still there, just not discovered yet.
Yeah.
You know?
No, of course. But that's what I'm saying, like of knowledgeable humans. Like I'm just saying like it.
Shane's like actual offense to that line.
No. I just think it's like, all right, so you're saying that these people who were, you know, hunter-gatherers were more knowledgeable than all right, in their time, they knew a lot about what they had to know about, but at the same time, like there wasn't, like we're talking about here, there wasn't that much to know about.
Yeah,
like,
exactly.
They had to know about like the land and like looking at moss and whether it, and a lot of that stuff was probably myths too. Like, to be fair, they lived off of it, but like a lot of that stuff may not have been true, that they were living off of like, oh, I see a moss on here and I think that means this, and it's just more of like a spiritual thing, you know? So like I think there's definitely an element of that.
I don't even know what
with
the
all
hell
this
we're saying, to be honest with you. What the fuck was that reference to the
fucking
moss?
lost
all right, so basically like a
What
hunter-gatherer is looking at the ground and is like trying to make a decision, and they see a rock with moss on it, and we think that they're geniuses for knowing that, oh, the sun was shining on this side, or you know, that means that this animal went this way, something like that. Like that also, a lot of that knowledge could have just been another shared myth that they believed in, that oh, they had a belief in that. So what I'm saying is that there was so much less to know back then than there is now.
Absolutely.
That I think it depends on how you interpret what he's saying. Like you're saying, you know, if you're
yes, I agree. I
just tend to think like there's, all right, so here's another example. Here's just a different, this is a different example.
I think we're talking about subjective fucking
no,
interpretations, but either way, you're wrong, Shane. So.
All right, so here's another one. He said, so I quote, they had physical dexterity that people today are unable to achieve even after years of practicing yoga or Tai Chi. I said, all in my notes, I said, I feel like this makes a lot of assumptions. Like, how are we to know that people didn't grow up in nourished lands when there was more food was really abundant, and they ended up being fat asses and doing nothing, half of the population? Like they could have, we don't know enough about them to know that they were all so physically capable compared to our current society. We know how humans default to not doing any physical activity if they don't have to, you know? So like, I think that just kind of like, also the fact that they're stronger and have more dexterity than not the average human, but of humans now. I think that that's probably also bullshit. Like we have, you know, world-class athletes that are probably,
I so disagree with you.
Well, they had to run around a forest.
Yeah, I feel like if you take average person, but like I think if you take average person now to average person, then there's significantly more
people unable to achieve. They have levels of dexterity and skill that we're unable to achieve.
Two-toe Alfred from 7,000 years ago, put him in the box against A-Rod. See It's a baseball
No,
burger.
no.
Put
They
fucking
said
Joe
dexterity.
Schmo from fucking
Dude,
12,000 years ago up against Tiger
how are
Woods
you
in
gonna
the
say?
box. No, dude, that's not
How are
how
you
this
gonna say
works.
that
That's
someone?
not
How are you gonna
this
say that
works.
some hunter gatherer has more physical dexterity than
Bro,
LeBron
I don't know.
James?
Can you chase down
Because
a
it's
lion,
LeBron James.
bro?
What do you mean? Of course,
They
LeBron
said,
James has
yeah,
physical
no,
dexterity over that guy, but in
yeah, no,
reality,
no, no. They. He said they. So what he said was they, as in they, like all the people back then. What he's
Yeah.
saying is all the people back then, and listen to this quote. People today are unable to achieve a level. They have a level of physical dexterity that people today are unable to achieve even after years of practice in yoga or tai chi. I think
still
that's
agree with that statement.
bullshit.
No,
I
I
think
agree
that's
with that
bullshit.
statement.
I think people easily achieved the level of physical dexterity they had when they were
No.
eating nuts and berries for half of their breakfast, and now we have well balanced diet. Like
Protein
what?
shake. All
Bro,
right. How the fuck?
Diet,
Yeah, like
I feel like you have to
we have
understand that, like,
steroids now. They had
Bro.
nuts and berries.
dude, I feel like you're trying to take peak level athletes and compare it to the average that he's saying.
No,
That's
well, that's
exactly
what
what you're
he's
saying.
saying. He's
No,
saying
it's
people that
not.
have practiced for years. He literally said people who have after years of practicing yoga or tai chi, whatever, have less. The people who do that, who practice for years, don't have a level of physical dexterity that matches everyone, all of them. I
No,
find that
Also,
fucking
like
hard to believe.
dexterity. What I don't is dexterity and like athleticism like two different things? Because like
think
I
dexterity
feel
is,
like
like,
to me,
flexibility and-
dexterity is like the nimbleness of your
It
fingers.
is.
That's
It's
how I think
exactly
of
that.
dexterity.
It's skill in performing tasks, especially with the hands.
Yeah.
So I mean, Shane, I think the
All
point
that
that he's trying to
I
make is
get
their
it.
survival. They're 50
I
fucking
get
years.
it.
Their life expectancy. These guys are refining
Look,
skill from the time they're
I'm just
born.
trying to be here for Team Modern Human, okay? I'm trying
Fuck
to make
modern
it
humans. Take me
Yeah.
back. All right, I'm sick of this shit.
Wow.
Modern human.
It's so interesting though that the two quotes, like those two quotes that you listed, that I thought were like, wow, that's kind of like really cool to think
I
about.
know.
It rings so true. Like it sounds so accurate. You're sitting there like angry. Like Shane is like
Yeah.
holding his phone like white
I'm
knuckles.
like, yeah,
I
fucking
can't believe he said
Yeah.
that. I can't believe it. Like
No, all right, but what about
Ravens.
the argument? Like, so he's saying that, all right, my real thing is that he's making the assumption that he's saying, like, they, as in they, like the people back then, have like, they're all super capable and that they're all very, if someone were to look back on history to our time and had to make, like, assumptions about us, maybe and without knowing it, like, they don't know how we live. Our default is to, like, we have 45% obesity rate in the US. We default to doing absolutely nothing, as little as possible, and just eating. So how do we not know that a lot of these hunter gatherers may have lived in fertile lands where they could go out and gather plenty of nuts and berries, and half of their population sat around on their asses and did nothing because they were these kings and queens, which we do see throughout history. They had these myths that they were holier than thou. Like, how do we know that there isn't this, like, essentially impoverished class that goes out and does all the work, and there's some people that do it? Like, I think he's making assumptions that, like, everyone lived this lifestyle and that, like, as a whole they all had these characteristics. And I think that there's a lot of assumptions being made into, like, because, like, he even said, though, to be fair, he said we don't know what life was like back then. Like, there's this whole blank period. We hardly know if they had cultures, if they had massive civilizations. But that's where I think, like, there's more, it's like just making assumptions. And I get, like, it's fair, he has to make it, like, you have to make assumptions somewhere. But that's where my head was going, was like, how do we, it was like in our art history class when they were like, oh, this means XYZ because there's a feather here and there's a head over there. And I'm like, you're just saying that because some other person said that was kind of true, and now everybody just believes it,
Yeah, but
I don't think you're right here, because you're saying, like, we do know that they had cultures. We don't know what the cultures were. We do know that they congregated and that they, like, roughly the sizes of the populations that they had. Like, the things that you said that we didn't know, we do know. The things that we don't know are those holes that are filled by, there aren't items, because they're not settlers. They're not settling and building things to carry around, and, like, they don't have many like, what's the word, possessions. So it's hard to track their history when you look back and try to get an understanding based on, like, the possessions that we can see.
Yeah.
So a lot of what you're saying that they did know, dude, like,
No, I'm saying that they do know, but I'm just saying that like the classification of all of that, like
Bro,
being so broad is like this is how all
I
hunter
think that
gatherers.
I don't-
a large majority of
I
them.
think you might be looking into like the all part of it like too
Yeah.
much. Like he said, they axed him in the fucking
Yeah.
head, the weak ones. Like clearly, the weak grandma who got her head chopped off wasn't beating LeBron in a race. You know what I mean? But I think
Yeah, that's right.
from what I got, I think he was saying the majority of people in these societies were more developed physically out of necessity than people like here,
Yeah.
which I could totally see.
Yeah.
I could totally get that. Okay, especially having a little of knowledge of the next chapter. At this point, they weren't settling around doing nothing. Okay, they were always walking and fucking hunting shit. Okay, bring the argument back at the next section, and maybe we'll have
All right.
Okay.
All right, so I want to move on from this to bring up just this other quote that I thought was obviously not related to any of this, but it was just like set me back, not in the same way that one did. But he said that the typical peasant in traditional China ate rice for breakfast, rice for lunch, and rice for dinner. If she were lucky, she could expect to eat the same on the following day. By contrast, ancient foragers regularly ate dozens of different foodstuffs. So not like that second part, but the first part, that the traditional Chinese peasant and probably a lot of people still in this world are eating like rice for breakfast, rice for lunch, and rice for dinner. And they're hoping that they're going to be able to have rice again tomorrow and not nothing. Just was like I feel like I know that intuitively that people deal with that, but just it was like it brought it right back to the surface that like, could you imagine like you like instead of making decisions for lunch, you were just like, oh, I'm hopefully eating rice tomorrow, you know?
To be honest with you, I was so expecting you to say something against him. I was
Yeah,
like, wait,
me
I was
too.
forming an argument in my head already.
No.
Wait, so you're just agreeing with like
Yeah.
his emphasis?
No,
there?
no, no.
I don't like that. Disagree, bro.
Yeah. No. Well, what do you want me to always disagree with?
No, I
That would be
just-
I feel like
hard.
that's your personality, honestly.
Yeah.
So.
Well, what are you? I mean, I don't want to.
Oh, what do you just
the
go
whole
with the
point
status
of
flow? Oh God, you don't
yeah. Well, the
question
whole point of a
anything?
book club is
Oh,
to
God.
think about things, not just to be like, oh yeah, that's right.
I
That's
know,
right.
or it's
I
really
just-
The whole point is to have a
Just for
conversation.
you to reiterate, what's your point?
My point was that it was fucking interesting. What other point do you want me
No,
to
that's
have?
fair. No, I didn't.
Yeah.
That's totally fair.
Like, how is it not clear what the point was?
Well, you probably could have just kept it to yourself at that point. Okay. Very interesting stuff.
All right, fine. Yeah. Well, all right. Moving on. What do you think is interesting, Joey?
How brutal
Joseph,
cows.
Josephina.
How brutal they were at the cows. Absolutely. Oh wait.
That's the next part too, dude. We didn't.
God
cover
damn
cows
it,
yet. I
dude.
swear to God, that's the next part. We did not cover cows.
Hey.
Look at Joey being an overachiever, reading ahead, and then getting cash, like getting beat up on for it.
Oh, so all right. So here's something interesting. So it goes back to like how we could revolve around like a central myth and everything like that, and how that could kind of gear us and direct us to somewhere. And he says, Homo sapiens can revise its behavior. Also threw me off so much is that like the like I guess like the proper word is Homo sapiens, and it always sounds plural, but then you use like the singular pronouns after. I was like, does this dude not go to English class or something? But whatever. So Homo sapiens can revise its behavior. I thought it'd say there, but whatever. Rapidly in accordance to changing needs. Cultural evolution depends. Oh no, what's this word? I don't know. Whatever. Something faster than generic evolution. So he was saying that by following these myths, we could more rapidly change our cultural beliefs than we could like evolutionary just over time. But I was like, I'm thinking like modern day. It's like it seems that like I can't tell if people like that still holds true in like today. You know what I mean? If there's like myths strong enough to like persuade like large amounts of cultures to like do like to significantly change like their opinions. It's like why would like I don't want to call like global warming a myth, but like the idea of like global warming. If we're so centralized about these stories and these arcs, I mean, like why is that not enough to like change our position or like infringements against human rights? Like I mean, like why is shit like that like this not myth but this fucking idea? I mean, like why is it so strong back in the day that it could change people's perspective on like a whole bunch of shit? But like today, it's like we're not as, it's not as like potent like
Yeah.
that arc like humans. Like I don't know if it's because like a myth was like such a like significant portion of these people's like, you know, like fucking cognitive load, that's like that's all they have to do, and there's like a lot less signals like back then than like today. I just found it interesting
as another point against them, I think that they were just dumber.
granted, bro.
No, to be
Granted.
fair.
No, obviously they were.
It's it's cognitive like agility, I think, is like what you're getting at. That like now it's very hard, like we're so set in our ways, and it's hard for like these new, I mean, it's like the idea would be, you're saying, is like if someone were to start a new religion.
Yeah.
Like, how is that ever going to catch on?
Yeah, it wouldn't.
Yeah.
I feel like it wouldn't. Like,
you'd have
and
to
like
start a
cults
cult. That's what a cult is. Exactly.
but like they never get to more than what, like a couple thousand people. You know what I mean?
Dude, don't hate on Scientology now. They're very successful.
I just think that it's like
it is possible. Like Scientology is an example. It is possible. I think that we just have so many myths now. Like back then, you probably had like you had the creationist story, or you had like your tribe's version of the creationist story, I think, and then you didn't hear like, oh, Johnny's in the other tribe and his story is different, you know? Like I think that there was like, you didn't have like a debate about which creation story was right. You just thought, hey, this is the story, you know?
It's also like there wasn't fact back then. Like, at least to the same degree.
Yeah, that's so true.
It's like you can't, you know, I can't like create a new theory of math and be like, oh, calculus is wrong, because there's calculus. Like there's all these things, these checks and balances saying that it's right. And I feel like now it's like there's a lot more proving than there used to be. Whereas like back then you could be like, well, if the sun comes up from that direction tomorrow, there's this God. And like you just know that I'm going to come up from that direction, so you can start persuading people. I think it was easier. There was easier persuasion because there was less rooted on fact.
It was also just like a giant echo chamber of tribes, because like I feel like the community aspect was like, I feel like it only thrived because they could, you know, relate to each other, and there was no disagree. You know what I mean? I feel like back then disagreements were probably a lot more heated than like today. You know, it's like if back then they're like, no, like. I don't even know what the fuck they'd be talking about back then or debating about. But
I want this nut.
Yeah, or whatever. But like, I think the reason their communities stayed tight, and like they were only between what, like 50 and 100 people, so they were super tight people, like super close, like, you know, even in proximity, I guess. But like, you know, there wasn't other external influences. It's everybody. You know, you're born, like, you know, you're told how to believe, like from your parents or your grandparents or whatever. You have kids, you tell them, and there's no, you know, Shane or Lucas being like, from, like you said, the outside, another tribe, like, hey guys, you ever think about this? It's just always the same fucking reinforced narrative.
Yeah.
So probably,
like,
I mean,
yeah, and they also said though that like there's a very good chance that tribe A was super docile and a very peaceful tribe, and like they took care of their elders and made sure that like even those born as like misfits, you know, lived a healthy life. And then there was the Ache or whatever they said, and like that I'll axe my aunt in the back of the head, and like anytime like this kid is funny, I'll kill him. Like this kid looks funny.
Like they'll go to that tribe will go kill tribe A and murder
like,
everyone.
One of the things that like
this kid's funny, I'll kill him.
No, the kid looks funny. Sorry.
Yeah.
It was.
What a dry fucking clan that one is.
Yeah, exactly. No laughing.
I'd be whacked right away. I wouldn't make it. You know what's funny? Reading this, I'm like, bro, I could have survived as a caveman. Easy, dude. Easy. I can't. I made it a day into Boy Scouts, but I'm like, yeah, dude, I'll fucking live off the land. I'll forage, bro. Are you kidding me?
Yeah, after reading this, I was literally, I think I wrote this down as a note. I was like, I'm sitting in bed right now, laying in my covers with a pillow, and I'm so glad I'm not a caveman. Like, could you imagine? Like, you have to sleep on the floor outside with like a rock for a pillow, and like,
I mean, they definitely
find your own food.
Like, yeah, super. But if it's, I'm not saying they were like, oh, this is great, but if you don't know what a pillow is, like, you can miss it. You know,
I know what a pillow is though, so I'm like, this is.
Oh yeah.
I would imagine how like, you know, comparatively, like knowing that, I'm just like, it's incredible.
It is incredible.
On that idea that you just brought up though, I thought what was interesting was he talks about how like I don't know if I like inferred this or if he talks about, but that humans, like, we evolve in the world of like ideas. Like evolution for us is still taking place, but like the world of ideas is where we're really evolving. Whereas, you know, he talks about how humans, Homo sapiens, are the same here in Australia, in England, in Africa. Like we're all Homo sapiens, but we have all these like our shared myths create these like cultures. You know, we all have all these different myths around how to live life and what's right and what's wrong. And it creates our like different cultures. But so like our differences are all in the world of like ideas, and our how we change is all in the world of just ideas. Like nothing,
It's
we're not
not real.
evolving physically.
Yeah. There's no. Yeah.
Well,
I thought that was the takeaway of the first part. The whole first part is that.
Mm-hmm.
You know what's but like, is that because it's like more beneficial for us? Like, is it our ideas evolve because it would be more detrimental to humans if they didn't and we were stuck in our ways, or because we've reached like the apex of like physical evolution? You know what I mean? Like what, like, I feel like there's got to be some sort of like sway, you know what I mean? Is it like, because we cannot, humans can no longer, you know, evolve in like the realm of evolution. Like we're not just gonna grow wings. Like we could fly. Why do we grow wings? You know what I mean? Like, and like, we're not gonna develop superpowers. So is it because like having these like false ideologies or whatever, like just like, you know, thoughts or like, you know, cultural norms would lead to human extinction? You know what I mean? And that it's more, you know, prudent for humans to, you know, evolve in our thoughts, like to prevent that instead of like physically. Like I can't even, like, what would be the next physical?
Well, we're still, I mean, we're still
mean,
technically evolving physically, but it's like,
but like what?
We're
Yeah,
all
I mean,
gonna,
like
we're all
like,
gonna be fat and fucking have bad posture.
I guess you can't
we're
tell because like
evolving
we need to.
Dude,
yeah.
that's like the whole thing that like your spine is gonna continue up and people are gonna grow like with their heads down because every generation now is looking down at their phones. That like that behavior over like tens of generations would literally cause like another like thing in your spine. Like kids will be born with fucked up necks.
Yeah, but isn't like
Shit like that. That's how we're.
Can you you can't negatively evolve though if you're thinking about like Darwin's.
Well, no, you can't.
Because of natural selection, because the survival fits.
Yeah, but natural selection doesn't apply. Yeah,
we don't live it. We're past natural selection.
You're living. People are breeding, no matter how stupid or like unathletic and incapable
COVID is a perfect example. In like, you know, natural selection, anyone who has it severely enough would die. But now we have 9,000 respirators in the U.S. and like those are keeping people alive who and others like other times would die.
Yeah, so anyone who has a weak immune system would die without modern medicine, you know, but now we're evolving. Like we're kind of in the evolutionary space. We're passing on traits that usually would have died off.
Yeah.
Oh, yeah.
And so,
right.
and good traits aren't meaningful anymore. Like the what may be considered good in like that era of like being physically fit, etc., is no longer a survival trait. It's no longer required for survival.
Yeah, that's true. That's kind of
so
crazy.
Like we're not like people aren't dying for those good traits. Like you're not worse off.
That the book will talk all about this in the later.
Yeah.
And I think that also just goes back to the point of like that they were saying that he brought up earlier about the rice thing. That like people grow up they're gonna grow up with shit fucking like just people who live only on poor diets are going to have weaker bones. They're going to have weaker immune systems. They're not going to live like to be as physically healthy humans. And you're going to have generations of those humans live because they can still get by. But it's like, it's a bad trait. It's a bad, you know, lineage.
Yeah, for sure.
But they can survive due to modern medicine and like the world that we live in.
It's always like a dicey fucking conversation, but it's like, when do you, like, I mean, I guess that's the point of like, you know, developed societies, is that we could like carry the weak. And like if I was in that position, I would want to be, you know what I mean? Like fucking, I would want modern medicine to help. But it's like, sometimes, bro, you gotta fucking. Oh, when they're all fat in the chairs.
They're all fat and they never walk. They don't know how to walk.
They can't anymore.
They have to like remember how to walk when they come back to Earth.
Yeah, dude, seriously though.
That's evolution, but that's exactly what you're saying.
Yeah,
that's what would happen over time.
And especially imagine if medicine came out with something where being obese didn't put you at risk for heart attacks and all the other different health issues, because you could just inject something and all of a sudden like it would clear all your arteries or something like that. Like
he briefly spoke on, like, he harped on obesity. Like, it was like a 2-sentence thing about how, like, we still have those genes that when your brain sees
oh yeah,
high calorie food,
Oh, the gorge
like,
gene.
yeah, we just, it's like, all right, we have to do it. Like, I have that pint of ice cream in my fridge. I start eating it. I'm like, oh, fuck it. This is amazing. I'm gonna eat the whole thing. But it's like, that's
yeah,
really rooted in our, like, DNA. It's like how we exist.
yeah.
That we still gorge. And that's probably why obesity is what it is.
Yeah. You know what it is? I feel like that's like the trigger of it is like could be like related to the gene, but I just feel like lack of like willpower is like the thing that makes you finish the fucking pint. You know what I mean? Like
Yeah.
the thought in your head is totally because of the gene. It's like oh calories. You know what I mean? But like nobody's actually like, and like I get it. It's just like rooted in you as a person. But I think just like having no willpower or like I don't want to say self-respect, but like self-respect. Like
Of course, yeah, but it's just the idea that the impulses are very strong and deeply rooted. Like you have to have, I think you can also think of it as like people who can resist those urges have very strong willpowers, not like people who can't have very weak ones. You know what I mean? It's almost like if you can resist those urges like forever, you've built a certain strength of willpower. You know what I mean? To not be like, I think that's also possible because like, dude, we have the same urges. Like, we still have our reptilian brain that's like running us. We're living like our brain is in 100,000 years ago and we're in a bed with pillows and sheets.
Dude, I think it's just so cool that like we just don't know with so much of this shit. Like, and he says it, like, there's literally just so much unknown. And like, a lot of the things he provides 3 different theories, but we still just don't know. And I just think that is so cool that there's like, it's not interpretation because there is some truth, but like the fact that there's like leading arguments for each thing, like he did it for the like killing off of all these like megafauna, like that humans are related to it. And like, he was just saying, like, the second explanation is that by the time that they already reached Australia, they'd mastered fire agriculture. So they burned down all the things. And that by burning down all the areas, this is what killed all these big creatures because there wasn't food. But like that, I just think it's so cool that there's like all these different, in theory, well, they're theories, but I was going to say opinions of like what the truth is. Cause like how can you find out? Like, I just think that's a very cool thing that we, we live in this crazy time of technology and knowledge, but are we ever going to find out? Probably not. Like, not objectively. There isn't going to be like objective truth.
No, there's nothing to recover about it.
Yeah.
Yeah. I had this note. And I think I literally wrote, I don't know why I wrote this, but I said, I know why after reading this, but I said history repeats itself. Just nobody gives a shit was my note because he said, perhaps if more people were aware, this is what we talked about with like the tree hugger thing, but he said, perhaps if more people were aware of the first and second wave extinctions, they'd be less nonchalant about the third wave they are a part of. If we knew how many species we've already eradicated, we might be more motivated to protect those that still survive. So like he talks about like all the megafauna and everything we've already eradicated, like past us has already eradicated so many species that now with like the industrial, which I think is something he'll probably talk about, but he mentions it here that like the industrial revolution has its own kind of sort of species extinction that's going on.
Yeah, in the water.
Killing off fish and things like that. Yeah. And he's like, if we knew how many we've already killed, maybe we'd think about it a little bit more. But it just like reminded me, like I just literally that quote like that I wrote down was just that nobody gives a shit. Like,
but it's also like the whole like being a tree hugger or whatever is like a romanticized thing of like, oh cool, like I want to be a tree hugger and I want to be someone who's like protecting the world from humans. But it's like, like this is something that's existed, and it's even to the point that it's like beyond our like comprehension and control for the first majority of it. I think now the argument is like, we know what we're doing. Like, that's it. Now we realize that the massive fucking destruction we have to our ecosystem. And that's the argument that sparks.
Yeah.
But, I don't know. I thought the first part of this book was really cool.
Definitely. I enjoyed it.
Since you skipped ahead, how's the second part, Joey?
Just as good.
Cool.
Also, I don't know when this happened, but like Shane, are you in the darkness right now?
Yeah, it's the
Dude,
yeah,
I
it's
was
just your
at the
head,
natural
bro.
light. I tried to like shimmy around and move to see if I could do something about it, but like there's 2 windows like right here, and it was like pretty bright, and we got on at like 6:30, I think is when we first initially got on the call, and I was like, oh, it's sunny enough, and then I just have noticed it getting darker and darker.
Yeah.
It's still like kind of bright out, but there's no light actually coming through.
No, like we could see like the brown wood in the back
No,
before. Now it's just your head,
Black.
dude.
Yeah.
Yeah, it's just my screen. The light from like the
You gotta get
background of
light,
my
dude.
screen is coming through.
Oh shit.
I know, I do. But is that all for us today, folks?
I think as Bugs Bunny would say, that's all, folks.
Actually, are we gonna get like trademark violations for that?
Fuck them. We're too small now.
That's all right. Yeah, well, that's it. What are we? Oh, next week, part 2.
It's
the
just all
agricultural revolution.
Yep.
Cool.
And as a little spoiler, you'll learn about wheat. You'll learn about cows. There's a lot going on
Yeah.
that you're gonna learn about. And it's more interesting than what it sounds.
Yeah, you really crushed that. Really set it up for success.
Yeah. Oh wait, real quick before we go, actually, what's the funniest thing is that this shit got footnotes in it, and like it's so.
I can't find it.
It's
no.
I don't care. It's just it's a straight bibliography. It just takes you to like the link or like where he found it,
Okay.
and it's just so refreshing knowing that like I don't have to look at what it is.
Are you traumatized still?
Dude, I saw the number 1. I was like, no. I looked and I was like, oh no, we're chill, dude.
Yeah.
This is the shit people 9 times out of 10 like aren't even supposed to read. You know what I mean?
Yeah.
It's not like fucking excess notes on the bullshit.
Bro,
No.
you read it on the Kindle app on your phone, and it just brings you to the last page of the book, and it kept happening. I'm like, what the fuck? Like, I couldn't figure it out, and I just realized that it had to be the bibliography. Like, it had to be the cited page and not, like, an actual footnote.
Yeah, because in that thing I sent you, like that PDF, well, I was convinced as I was reading it that I was like, this is fucking like some bootlegged one. Like, it might be some guy's idea or like some interpretation. I was like, how's this just up here for free, you know? But
It's illegal, so we should probably no. People just download it on Kindle and then upload it to random sites as like a PDF. So we are not advising this whatsoever.
it was
but
out
you
of
can-
necessity, not want.
You,
Okay, I
you
didn't have the
can.
book.
We've never done this before. You can find a copy if you really can't afford to buy your own online.
And it's a .org, so you'll feel good about yourself. It's not like a sketchy
Yeah,
site.
you could
Just
pretend that you could pretend you're
school.
not breaking the law.
I think it's academia.org that has it, to be honest with you.
Shane says.
So, guys, if you have any questions, if you think we're straight idiots and don't know what we're talking about, reach out to us on Twitter or Facebook or Instagram or snail mail or whatever you want to do. And
Really just Twitter.
Tell us. Really just Twitter, honestly.
What's our handle?
My handle is J_D'Amelio.